Okay, today we're going to be speaking about continuing in Siman Tzadi Vav's Halacha Aleph, also with Beis and Gimel, and we're going to talk today about Mechalyah Lishvach, part one. There's going to be a second part on Mechalyah Lishvach as well, and that is we've been talking about Davacharv, and we heard in the past that there's a rule that if you take a Davacharv and you cut it with a non-kosher knife, then the Davacharv becomes treif, even though the knife was Ein Ben Yomer. So usually the din is that if something is a kli is Ein Ben Yomer, the Blios that come out of that kli cannot affect something else. But in the case if the Blios go into a Davacharv, it's cut. Davacharv cuts that thing. I'm sorry. The Blios, right? The knife is Ein Ben Yomer. That even then the Blios become do affect the food and do make the Davacharv to be treif. Okay, I'll mention in passing. Most poskim it's a shayla, but most poskim assume that that's a din deraisa. Anyhow, so the word Mechalyah, what does it mean Mechalyah Lishvach? It makes it something's it Lishvach to make it better. I mean not lefkam as it usually would be. It usually not sound lefkam. Here we say no, it makes it Lishvach. So Rashi says the word Mechalyah means to sweeten. One of the mefarshim in the Medrash, the Matnas Kahuna, points to Targum Yernison in Shoftim, where it says Ma Masik Midvash, it says Ma Masik Midvash, and the Targum says Ma Choli Miduvsha. Okay, so the word Mechalyah or Choli means to be sweet. Okay, so it means it sweetens it. It sweetens, so that we have this thing that's lefkam, which would be negative, it would be bad, and now it's sweetened, meaning it makes it positive. Okay, makes it into a positive taste, so therefore the din of Netzal lefkam doesn't apply. Okay, so how does that work? What does that mean? That the Davacharv somehow magically takes this thing that was tam lefkam and makes it and sweetens it and makes it lishvach. Okay. Now I actually have a thought, which I'm not going to mention now. A thought about a scientific explanation of how that works. I'm only mentioning it. I don't believe it's correct because it's some of the dinamo that doesn't apply to. But for people who feel more scientifically, they say, well, how could that possibly work from a scientific perspective? I actually have a theory of how it could work scientifically. Again, it doesn't work out with all the pratim of the din, so I'm not going to say it, but just to show that there's such a, even for the scientific minds out there, there is a way to understand how that could work. But anyhow, let's see if we could try to figure out how it works. Okay, today I'm going to mention a reason. Next time, I'm going to mention other reasons. And we'll see the next time some actually nafkaminas for it. But let's say the reason like this. Prima Gordon says like this. The introduction to the reason is going to come from the Prima Gordon. The Prima Gordon says that we say, that Mechalyah Lishvach can, a Davacharv can be Mechalyah Lishvach, and it could take this bad taste and make it Lishvach, the taste that would be Lishvach Lishvach. He says that's only true if the tam is still the tam is lefkam, it's negative, but it's not inedible. Okay, he says if it got to the point was the Michael hanifsar mi'orchel odam, if the thing had become completely inedible, not just that it's lefkam, it has an off taste or makes a negative taste into this specific food. It was completely inedible. If that's what were to happen, then it can't be Mechalyah Lishvach. It's not Isser at all anymore. There's also Ritva who seems to say like that. It's not Isser at all anymore. It's not Isser, and therefore there's nothing, you can't save it. There's nothing to be Mechalyah Lishvach. Okay, that's just an introduction. So what we're focusing on is that Mechalyah Lishvach works is the food is l'maisa, it's edible. And it's also, but it would give a negative taste into the food that we have over here. Okay, it would be nice time of kam. So I think that we can find an explanation for how Mechalyah Lishvach works in the Ra'ah. The Mishkan Yaakov brings it. The Ra'ah is in the Kabayas. And the Mishkan Yaakov is in Shulchan Lamed Gimel. And I'm going to explain how that would work according to this Ra'ah with the Mishkan Yaakov. It happens to be that they're going within a specific shita, a shita that holds, we've talked about this, and we'll talk more next time about it, that Mechalyah Lishvach is only for chiltas specifically. That's the case where the Gemara says that it's for chiltas and not for other things. We hold Halacha that applies to all Davacharv, so I'm going to say according to that. And I'll mention, as I'm about to start this, is that what the Mishkan Yaakov says, again, within the Ra'ah, that there are reasons to think that the Raman, Pirush Mishnayos, and the Chazon Ish also would say the same thing. They say things that I don't think it's as clear, but knowing what the Mishkan Yaakov says, quoting the makes you think that that's what they had in mind also. They say like this. Davar charif, the fact that it has such an acerbic taste, it's so sharp or sour or whatever taste of whichever version of charif it is. The fact that it has such a sharp taste, it makes it that the food itself, it takes away from how desirable the food is. Think about an onion. Okay, the onion has a really sharp taste, or a challah has a really sharp taste to it. So that's it's edible or it's usable, but the fact that it's so sharp, and that a little bit detracts from the value of the food that it has over here. Okay, now we could counteract that negative aspect that there is to this davar charif by adding diluting it in just about anything. Anything that's not charif that we mix into this food will dilute the sharpness of it. So this negative quality that the davar charif has, again, it's edible and it's perfectly fine, but it has a little bit of a negative quality to it. We can counteract that negative quality by mixing in just about anything else into it. Because by diluting it, it won't be as strong. It will be less charif than it was. So what happens is that when we take the tam that's lifgam that's absorbed into the knife, that tam that's in there mellows the davar charif tam, the charifus of the davar charif. And so from that perspective, even though in theory this Ein Ben Yomer tam is nus tam lifgam, but in this situation it's not, because in this situation the benefit that it's giving to us is which mellows out the charifas of the other food, overall makes it that we've upgraded the taste of the davar charif. We had a benefit to it, and therefore it's Mechalyah Lishvach. It makes it it overall is considered to be Nus Tam Lishvach. And in fact, if you look at the Gemara, when the Gemara says about Mechalyah, it says it's Kin Nus Tam Lishvach with a chaf at the beginning. It's like it's Nus Tam Lishvach, which is to say it's not the traditional Nus Tam Lishvach, which is adding this ingredient to that food makes it taste better. But in this case, it's overall. Usually this would be lifgam, but in this case it is nus tam lishvach, and therefore it makes the food asur. Now, I'll just mention two things as we're saying this, is that one is, there's going to be a din sim kuf gimel about this, which is what happens if something is a little bit lefkam and a little bit lishvach, but overall it gives you a benefit. That this might be an example of that. I mention that just quickly. And second is that we have to remember that we only have to have a possibility that it's better. I mean, sometimes it will and sometimes it won't. Even the possibility is enough to make the food asur, because otherwise we can't take advantage of the nizam of gam unless we're sure that's going to happen. Okay, anyhow, so this is a hezber from it's a ra'ah, as explained by the Mechalyah. And again, I said maybe others may say the same thing as well. That's what we're going to say. For today, that will be enough for a reason. Next time we're going to talk about another reason, other reasons, about other explanations for how Mechalyah might work, and we'll see if possible enough to me is that. Okay, now, let's move on. We know, we've spoken about in the past, that the Gemara says, I'm going to break it down to three rules that have to do with davar charif. One is that ducha de sakina. Ducha de sakina can get the first is ducha de sakina can get tam from a tznoin or a chiltas. Those are two gemaras, even though there's no heat. So one is that the ducha gets tam out of these foods, even though there was no heat. Usually, you need for tam to transfer, it needs to be heat. In this case, tam can transfer even without heat. That's one thing. Next thing is, the Gemara says there's no nat bar nat for a tznoin that was cut with a fleshig knife. Right, that's it then. Even though it was cut with a fleshig knife, really we should say nat bar nat, and you should be allowed to eat it with dairy. We say no, there's nat bar nat does not apply because the tznoin was cut with a fleshig knife. Okay, so one Gemara said duchka for tznoin and chiltas. Two different Gemaras. The one din that comes out of the Gemaras is that duchka draws time out even that heat. Din number two is that nat bar nat doesn't apply for tznoin that was cut with a fleshig knife. That's the second one. And the third is that there's a din of Mechalyah Lishvach when you cut a chiltas with an Ein Ben Yomer non-kosher knife. Okay, that was a Gemara chiltas that now we just draw the time out, but it's Mechalyah Lishvach for those dinim. Now, in those two Gemaras, I said three dinim, but they're really two Gemaras. The Gemara seems to connect the din to the fact that the chiltas and the tznoin are charif. Each one of them it says is, since it's Charav, therefore this and this thing. Okay? But there's really a Machlokes Rishonim whether it applies to all Davar Charav or just these specific cases. If there's Lamaisa, the Gemara says it Chiltas and Snine, but some Machlokes Rishonim does it apply to only to those specific things. That's where the Gemara said it. Or does it apply to any Davar Charav? And the reason for that is because the Gemara seems to connect it to being Charav. And it says, since the Charav, therefore it has these properties. Okay, there's a Machlokes Rishonim about that. Okay, we've mentioned that. Now, how do the Mechaber and the Ramah argue on that? I'm passing on that. So for the first and the second din, the Mechaber and the Ramah are clear that Duchul the Sakina can get tam out of any Davar Charav, even without any heat, and that not Barnat does not apply when you do that. Okay, those are basically Beferish din in the Mechaber and the Ramah, that for Halacha, the first one and the second Halacha. Duchul the Sakina could draw a tam, if it's, and not Barnat doesn't apply when it's a Davar Charav. Okay, now what about the third thing, which it is about Mechalyah Lishvach? The Ramah is clear again that it applies to every Davar Charav. Not only to Chiltas, it applies to all Davar Charav. The Mechaber's Shita is not as clear, and that's as follows. In Siman Tzadivav Halacha Aleph, he brings 2 days about whether Mechalyah Lishvach is for all things or not. But he says that the way he says it implies that he's being makel, and it's only for Chiltas. Because he brings the first day as the day that he brings the stam, and that first is the day that says that it's only for that there's no din of Mechalyah Lishvach for Davar Charav. And then he brings v'yesh that it applies for Davar Charav is Mechalyah Lishvach. The din of Chiltos is in Kuf Yud. Okay, that's a completely different din. But in Siman Tzadivav, the mashmois in Halacha Aleph is that Mechalyah Lishvach doesn't only applies to Chiltos. And then, again, if you look at Halacha Gimel, in Siman Tzadivav Halacha Gimel, he says that he talks about grinding spices, a Davar Charav, in a fleshig grinder. So he says is you should only don't eat them with milchids if the grinder had been used for meat within the past 24 hours. Why do I care if it's 24 hours? But the Mechalyah Lishvach, that's because Mechalyah Lishvach is only for Chiltas and not for other Davar Charav. So this is not Chiltas, this is just grinding some spices. So therefore, Mechalyah Lishvach does not apply. So so in Halacha Aleph, he brought both days, but he brought it in a way that was mashma he's mekel, and he says it only for Chiltas. And Halacha Gimel, he's even more clear that it's only for Chiltas, meaning for every other Davar Charav it doesn't apply. Okay, that's fine if you're learning Siman Tzadivav. The problem with the Taz and the Shach both ask is that, well, if you turn a few pages to Siman Kuf Gimel, he says the following din, almost exact same din as he said here in Halacha Gimel. There it's in Kuf Gimel Halacha Vav over there. There he says is if you have hot peppers that were cooked, would mean another Davar Charav, that were cooked in a non-kosher pot, the peppers become non-kosher because of the din of Mechalyah Lishvach, even if the pot is in the Binyamai. Okay, so that's saying that the din of Mechalyah Lishvach applies to any Davar Charav, not just the Chiltas. It doesn't say Chiltas there, it does talk about peppers over there. So which one is it? In Siman Tzadivav, he said Mechalyah Lishvach applies only to Chiltas, and in Siman Kuf Gimel, he says it applies to every Davar Charav. Okay, so that's the Taz and Shach asked that question. Okay, and they don't answer. They don't give an answer. The most is that the Shach says is that Lamais is the Ramah is machmir on this, as I told you before. The Ramah is machmir that it applies to all Davar Charav, and that's what you should do. The Shach says v'chein das kol achronim v'chein noyagim. That's what you should do, which is that he's not answering the stira in the Mechaber between Siman Tzadivav and Siman Kuf Gimel. He doesn't answer the stira, and he says but you should be machmir like the Ramah. Okay, so for us right now it's just a theoretical question. What does the Mechaber hold? Okay, so the Pri Megadim but gives an answer to explain why the Mechaber seems to be soiser himself from Siman Tzadivav to Siman Kuf Gimel. And he says like this. As a rule, he says the Mechaber is machmir, and says is that Mechalyah Lishvach applies to any Davar Charav. And the only reason why in Siman Tzadivav he's being makel is because in Siman Tzadivav he's talking that Siman Tzadivav is in Basa B'Chalav. It was cut with a fleshig knife or a milchig knife. That's what the din I'm talking about. And that's the reason why he's being miracle, because in that case we have two things that have to happen, two shilas that we have to be machmir on in order to make the food fleshig or milchigs. One is we have to say Mechalyah Lishvach, like we've been talking about, and the other is we have to say that the Davar Charav voids the not barnat. It makes it that there's no din of not barnat. Now, for each one of those, we're machmir, as I mentioned beforehand. We're machmir about not barnat. I told you the Mechaber is machmir that not barnat does not apply for a double charv. Even Mechaber says that straight out, that not barnat doesn't apply for double charv. And he says in Sim Kuf Gimel that Mechalyah Lishvach applies for all double charv. Okay, so he's not on both of those dinim he's machmir, even if it's not just a chiltis. But if they happen together, then the Mechaber says you don't have to be machmir. So in Sim Kuf Gimel, it says that if you have a double charv, you cut with a treif knife. So then we say Mechalyah Lishvach, because we just have one din. We just have the din. We have just a question of should be Mechalyah Lishvach by a double charv, by all double charv, and he's machmir on that din. He also says that not barnat doesn't apply by double charv. That was in Tzadi Vav also. He says that not barnat doesn't apply for a double charv if it's ben yomai. But one is they have both together. If the knife is in the ben yomai, and it's only a shaila of meat or milk, meaning it's not barnat, a shaila of potential of not barnat, then we are not machmir for both shitas, and therefore we are makel to say is you don't have to be choishish that not both of these things, not barnat and in the ben yomai, both of them don't apply by other things, and therefore you could be makel. Okay, so that's the Prim Gadol is being miyashav the Mechaber to say that the difference is because in Simon Tzadi Vav is in Hilchos Bas B'Cholav, Simon Kuf Gimel is in Hilchos Taruvus. So Taruvus means of Isser. So in Bas B'Cholav we could be makel because we have two machlokes and we have to be machmir about double charv. And in Simon Kuf Gimel we're going to be makel because there's only one machlokes in machmir. That's it. Okay, that's the Prim Gadol's yishuv for the Mechaber. Now, the Prim Gadol says, but I have to just tell you something. All of this that I'm telling you is all in the sheet of the Mechaber. That's very nice that the Mechaber holds that that when there's two dinim together, we're not going to be machmir. He says, but the Ramah, the din is like the Ramah, who's machmir even when both come together. Okay, even if they both happen together, the Ramah is clear that he's machmir even when they both come together. Okay, and the people said, and that's what you should do. I'm just being yash of the Mechaber like that. Okay, that's what the Prim Gadol says. That the din is like this. But and as I said to you before, and the Shach says it himself. He says kol achronim. What do you say? To be machmir. The Shach doesn't point out that it's both together, but that's the case he's talking about. Where they're both together. But on that thing, the Beis Meir says that no. You're reading. It's a misreading of the Ramah. The Ramah didn't mean is that it's also b'diavad. The Ramah just means that lechatchila you shouldn't do it. Lechatchila you shouldn't cut a double charv if it's in the ben yomai with plans of eating it with milchiks. But if it already happened. Then he said, but yeah, but you could be makel. He says, yeah, the same thing as the same logic. He doesn't quote the Prim Gadol, but he's the same idea as the Prim Gadol that when the two didn't come together, not barnat and Mechalyah Lishvach, to say both of those fall double charv, that but the evid you don't have to be machmir. You have to be machmir l'chatchila, and that's what the Rambam meant. But you don't have to be machmir b'diavad. Now. Those who disagree with the Beis Meir say, that's all very nice if you only Simon Tzadi Vav, but if you look at the Simon Tzadi Hey, in Halacha Beis, the Rambam seems to be very clear that he's machmir even in cases of b'diavad. Okay? But that's what the Beis Meir says. Now, this case that we just described is a very common case. It's one of the most common cases of a double charv shilas that come up in the kitchen, which is somebody cut an onion with a fleshig knife, not realizing what they were doing. They cut it with a fleshig knife and they put it into a soup with milchiks, or the other way around. They cut it with a milchik knife and they put it into the chicken soup. Okay, they cut it with double charv with a knife, and the knife was in the ben yomai. Most knives in a kitchen are in the ben yomai. You have stam kelu in the ben yomai. So we're dealing with what are we dealing with? We're dealing with a knife that's in the ben yomai. And we want to be, in order to be machmir, we have to say two things. We have to be machmir and say is Mechalyah Lishvach for all double charv, and we have to say there's no not barnat for any double charv, not just for chiltas and snaim. So we have to be machmir about both of those. So the all poskim, aside from the Beis Meir, everyone who we mentioned beforehand would say is the soup is treif. You made this onion even though it's already in the soup, it makes no difference. The onion from the fleshig knife in the milchik soup, or the onion from the milchik knife in the fleshig soup, it would be treif, and the Beis Meir is going to be makel. The Beis Meir says, b'diavad, that you did it already, you could be makel even if you have both of these together, not barnat and in the ben yomai. Okay, so and I'll mention that as I mentioned, this is the Beis Meir who argues. Rav Chaim Friedman says that Rav Pam used to be makel like this Beis Meir, and Rav First says that Moshe was makel as well also. So there's basis of being makel to the Beis Meir. As I mentioned, lots of people said not like the Beis Meir. The Ramah himself seems to see pretty clearly it's Tzadi Hey, not like the Beis Meir. But such is the sheet of the Beis Meir. And there are those who rely on it who rely on it. Again, the whole Beis Meir is the case of the Yemen, so there are those who rely on it when it comes up. Now, I just mentioned what I think is the most common cases of double harv is at homes. At least Mechalyah Lishvach come up for onions. But in industrial settings, it comes up in homes also, but in industrial settings, the more common issue that we have is with vinegar. And that is like this. When you have vinegar or food together with vinegar, like a pickle, sitting in a non-kosher tank for long enough to become kosher, so kosher is a way for time to transfer without heat, so it sits here for long enough that it becomes kosher. Excuse me. There's no heat or duchet, it just covers. So it says like this. The Rama says that even if the tank is Eina ben Yoma, which is it's automatic. I'm sorry. Even if the tank, I'm take that back. Even if the tank is Eina ben Yoma, still the vinegar becomes treif. This Rama is in Simon Kuf Chaf Beis. Okay, it's just similar about Eina ben Yoma. The Rama says that the vinegar becomes treif, because the chorev taste of the vinegar is Mechalyah Lishvach, the Eina ben Yoma. So vinegar sat, or pickles and vinegar sat in a treif tank, and by the time the Blios came out, it was Eina ben Yoma. The din is that the food is treif b'diavad, even though it's Eina ben Yoma, because it's Mechalyah Lishvach. Okay, and the same thing happens. I'm talking about industrial, but it happens in homes also. The same thing. I put pickles and they're brine. I just put the whole pickle and it's all of its juice into a milchig container. So now the milchig container is Eina ben Yoma. If it sits there for long enough to become kavush, then you can't put those pickles into a meat salad, because the pickles have become milchigs, and it's Mechalyah Lishvach, and there's no nat, and therefore you put them into a meat salad. Okay, now all of that I just said so far seems pretty straightforward, but there is a dissenting opinion. Okay, and in order to explain that, I have to tell you another machlokes, and that is about how quickly coverage of vinegar happens. Okay, we'll talk about that in Mr. Shem and Sim Kofei, but the simple rule is like this. Coverage, as a rule, takes 24 hours. So if I have, water or juice sitting in a treif container, it takes 24 hours for the Blios to happen. Okay, now, that means that it's automatic that when you do coverage, the Blios are going to be lifgam. But okay, that's what coverage takes 24 hours to put time in or to take time out. The Mechaber says, in some kofei, that if brine, which means a very salty mixture, brine or vinegar are exceptions to the rule. And for them, coverage happens in a much faster time, called Kadesh Yaman al Ishri Asiach, however long it takes to heat it up in the fire, which we say means 6 to 18 minutes. Okay, a very short amount of time. So according to the Mechaber, excuse me, sorry about that. According to the Mechaber, those things have coverage, quick coverage, and the Shach says no. He said it's true that for brine you have quick coverage in this 6 to 18 minutes, but for vinegar it takes full 24 hours. And the Magen Avraham, now we go switch to Aruch, and the Magen Avraham says that you should be machmir like the Mechaber. Okay, the Magen Avraham says you should be machmir like the Mechaber, that even vinegar has this quick coverage. Okay, so we have just some shitas over here, a machlokes of whether coverage for vinegar happens very quickly or it happens in the regular 24 hours. And the Magen Avraham and the Mechaber said that it happens quickly, and the Shach says that it takes the full 24 hours. Now, the Chazon Ish says like this. Let's go look at how the Magen Avraham says this. The Magen Avraham says something really unusual. He says, "Ulachein, if Amad b'kli chametz, if the vinegar sat in a chametz dekli ben yomai, a chametz dekli was ben yomai, v'shah b'socher k'tei shitnu al or v'yarsiach, it sat on the fire for long enough for this short amount of time, and I just told you, 6 to 18 minutes, so kavush happens, also medina. So then the vinegar becomes chametz dik, and the vinegar can't be used on Pesach. Okay, so he just said since I hold that, since the din is that vinegar makes quick coverage, so if it sat even for a couple of minutes, it'll happen, which is very easy to happen. It doesn't have to take 24 hours, just a couple of minutes, it'll be covered, and that vinegar will not be allowed to use on Pesach. Okay, so Chazon Ish says, okay, din-wise it makes sense, but why does the Magen Avraham say that the kli had to be ben yom? He says, "Ochein amad b'kli chametz ben yomai." Why do you say it has to be ben yomai? What happened to the Mechalyah Lishvach? Which is, let's say it had been Eina ben Yoma. Let's say the kli was Eina ben Yoma. So what's the difference? If it's Eina ben Yoma, Lamaisa, the time is going to come out will be Eina ben Yoma, but the vinegar will be Mechalyah Lishvach. So the Chazon Ish says, you see from here that the Magen Avraham holds that vinegar is not considered charif. So since it's not charif, it can't be Mechalyah Lishvach. So that's why he had to pick a case that was Ben Yomei, because it would be Ein Ben Yomei, then it would not be Mechalyah Lishvach because it's not charif at all. Okay. So the Chazon Ish says not only, he says, if that's what the Magen Avraham says, he says if that's what the Magen Avraham, and the Magen Avraham is the Machmir who says that vinegar has a quick coverage. He says the Shach who says that vinegar does not have a quick coverage. It takes a full 24 hours. So the way the Chazon Ish is saying that it's even less charif. That's why it's even less strong than the Magen Avraham holds. So the Chazon Ish, the Shach should surely agree with him. I mean, he has no idea that the Shach agrees. He says, but if the Magen Avraham says this, the Shach, who's so to speak the more mekel in these overall dinim, should even be more mekel. Okay, excuse me. So the Chazon Ish says that this din that he's saying that vinegar is not charif, he says it's sort of like an extension of the shaila we had before about whether vinegar is Mechalyah Lishvach. I'm sorry, whether only chiltus is Mechalyah Lishvach. He says, although we're machmir that everything is Mechalyah Lishvach, he says, but we're a little conservative about how we decide what's charif. We don't take everything as charif, and that's why he would say that vinegar should not be. But at the same time, Lamaisa, it's a question of the Chazon Ish. He's saying that even the Shach should say this, that vinegar is not charif, when Lamaisa, the Shach says in a few different dinim, it's in Samach Tes, and in Tzim Tzadivov a little later, he says that it's charif for other dinim, it uses vinegar as an example of a double charif. Okay, anyhow, so back to our Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish says, makes his dik in the Magen Avraham. He wants to spill it over to the Shach also, but his ikar point is coming from the Magen Avraham. So that's the Chazon Ish's question. And the Chazon Ish therefore says it must be that he holds that vinegar is not charif. So this question that I just mentioned, this Chazon Ish's question, he's not the first one to ask that question. The Chaf Yaakov and the Kvei go right there on the spot. Both of them look at this Magen and say, what is he talking about? Why did he say that it's Ben Yomei? Why not be even Ein Ben Yomei should have the same din in it? Okay, so and they look at it and they say this doesn't make any sense. Well, the din should be is, and they say the din should be is even if it's Ein Ben Yomei, meaning they're not accepting. Well, they say we don't know why the Magen Avraham says that, but for whatever reason it doesn't make any sense. We shouldn't agree that should be the din, and it should be Mechalyah Lishvach even if it's Ein Ben Yomei. So Pri Megadim says, I'll answer you why the Magen Avraham says this case like this, that it was Ben Yomei. And he says, what he says here is reminiscent of what I just mentioned to you a minute ago, how the Pri Megadim was Miyashiv the Mechaber. And that is like this. He said, when we were talking about the Mechaber in Simon Tzadivov versus Kuf Gimel, we said that the Mechaber holds you could be Mekel if we have two things together. If we have Ein Ben Yomei and not Barnat, then we're Mekel. Should we say for every double charif should be Mechalyah Lishvach and avoid and get past not Barnat? So the Mechaber says you could be Mekel, and the Ramah says you should be Machmer. And that's what we said a minute ago. How people going to answer that. So here in Aruch he says, I'm going to tell you what the Magen Avraham means. The Magen Avraham also agrees to the Ramah that if there's two things you have to be Machmer. But in this case, it's because there are three things to be Mekel, to three shilas. And since there are three shilas, that's why the Magen Avraham is Mekel, which are the three shilas, a convergence of these three shilas. It would be, if it's Ein Ben Yomei, and this question of not Barnat, that has to do with because chametz before Pesach is considered not qualifies for a not Barnat. That's for a different day. But so if it's Ein Ben Yomei and it's a case of not Barnat, both of those things to say it for a regular double charif, and to say that we should say quick coverage for double charif for vinegar. Again, remember that's a machlokes whether you say quick coverage for vinegar or not. So if we have all three of those together, that's the case that the Magen Avraham wants to be mikol on. That to say that it's only if it's Ben Yomei. You don't have to be machmir for three things to say quick coverage for vinegar and no not barnat for all double charif and Mechalyah Lishvach for all double charif. That you don't have to be. That's what the Magen Avraham means. Only if it's Ben Yomei. But if you're missing any of those three, then you're back to the regular dinim that vinegar is charif. So essentially, that's an answer for the Magen Avraham. Again, it's along the lines of how the Pri Megadim himself answered the Shulchan Aruch, and it's along the same lines. But the point basically is it's got a very, very specific case that the Magen Avraham is being mekel about, and it's not that the Magen Avraham holds that vinegar is not charif. Yeah, in almost every situation, vinegar is going to be considered charif, except for this very specific one, and this very specific application is where the Magen Avraham is going to be mekel. Now, all these people I'm mentioning to you who are disagreeing with Chazon Ish are all very consistent with the Ramah, who said, as I mentioned, the Ramah says that vinegar can be Mechalyah Lishvach. Okay, the Ramah is straight out in Kuf Chav Beis that vinegar could be Mechalyah Lishvach. Okay, not like what the Chazon Ish is saying. And also, this now we go just jump a few hundred years. The Mishnah brings like that. Okay, the Mishnah rules that like the Shach, that coverage of vinegar takes 24 hours. Okay, and there's no quick coverage. He doesn't pass like the Magen Avraham on that part of it. So that means it's automatic that if you have vinegar in a chametz kli, it's automatically going to take 24 hours it's automatically going to be Ein Ben Yomi by the time comes out. Because if it takes 24 hours for coverage, then it's going to always be Ein Ben Yomi by the time the time gets out, because it took 24 hours. So he says, but the Mishnah says, okay, so it takes 24 hours for it to come out. He says, but you should know that that's not going to help you when it's vinegar, because for vinegar, it's going to be Mechalyah Lishvach. So it does take 24 hours, like the Shach says. It takes 24 hours for the time to come out, but vinegar is Charaf, and therefore, but when the time comes out, it will be Mechalyah Lishvach and make it usher, even though it's in a bin yomer. Okay, so he's saying again, not like this Chazon Ish, and Rebelsky and others have all accepted what the Mishnah says. Again, which we mentioned, many who say like that, which are an implicit rejection of this Chazon Ish, and they say that vinegar is considered Charaf for these dinim, and it can be Mechalyah Lishvach. Okay, in Mitzvah Hashem, we'll speak about next time. We'll see rayas of other people, even other rayas, to this idea that Mechalyah Lishvach even applies to vinegar. But that's enough for today.